The game is over for Selangor against JDT. A defeat in the way it was expected, but not the manner in which they surrendered. Against a JDT not at their best, still are trying to find the right gears in the way they want their best 11 to be ahead of the AFC Champions League Elite campaign. But for Selangor, if they fail to beat DPMM at home for their first home game of the season, that's when the real trouble will begin in earnest. Once again, Johor Darul Takzim make easy work of Selangor as they defeated their fiercest rivals by 3 clear goals to claim their 8th successive Piala Subansing, or also known as the Sultan Ahmad Shah Charity Cup, and their 10th overall in this tournament as the Malaysian Super League 2025-26 kick off in earnest with this curtain raiser tonight. Overall, Johor had it pretty easy for much of this game, so it was not a surprise that despite fielding quite a number of debutants, Hector Havel, John Irazabal, João Figueiredo, Nacho Mendes, Jonathan Silva, altogether 5 debutants in their starting 11 with Samu Castillo as captain, that Johor were able to once again outperform, out-dominate and outshine their opponents without breaking too much of a sweat. Partly because even though Johor were not at their best, Selangor were rather poor as well. In Kazukito Kinoshi's first ever encounter against the reigning domestic quadruple champions, he did try to find a way to formulate a tactical plan that was aimed to stymie the Southern Tigers, but it was quickly undone or unraveled as quickly as the second minute. And it was pretty evident that the issues that I had mentioned in the previous video about Kinoshi being under fire ahead of this season, it has manifested itself on the pitch for much of this game. And in light of Johor's comfortable 3-0 win, I would touch on Johor's performance, but at the same time, I'll point out a lot more on Selangor and what does it mean for the Red Giants as the season now gets underway. A defeat against Johor Darul Takzim is not unexpected, but it's the manner in which how the vanquished perform against the leading powerhouses in Malaysian football of the day. And in Selangor's case, who have been successive runners-up finishers in the Malaysian Super League in the past 2 seasons, they seem to still be trying to solve that question without finding an answer on this. And even though it was a lot better than what they had seen, or rather a lot better than how they had performed against Johor last season, including that 1-6 thrashing in the Malaysia FA Cup final at the Bukit Jalil National Stadium last year. But still, that the way Selangor surrendered themselves with barely a fight, is a worrying sign for the Red Giants. Already, it's one thing to go a goal down as early as the first or second minute, because when you go a goal down so early on, there are still more than 80 minutes and added time to recover from this advantageous situation. But it's how the team responds after falling behind. And for some reason, the Red Giants, as to how they play on the pitch, they seem to allow Johor to have a lot of control of the ball. They ceded possession, they ceded territory. It was only a miracle that Johor only led 1-0 at halftime. How bad did they get? It got quite bad that you can say Selangor were barely able to implement the pre-game tactical plans that Kinoshi might have envisaged or planned in dealing with the strongest club in Malaysian football. In fact, it took them around half an hour for Selangor to have some kind of meaningful action in the Johor third. But when Faisal Halim, the skipper of the day, got the ball after a rather careless pass from GDT, he subsequently managed to lose it as well. And Selangor were only a goal down, mainly because of their best player of the day, their goalkeeper Kalamullah Al-Hafiz. The keeper who was given the nod to start in the first game of the season for the Red Giants, he was outstanding for much of the game. He could do nothing to the 3 goals conceded. The first goal where Jairo made his mark by scoring on his debut, there was nothing he could do because the Selangor defense were caught napping. What could he do in that situation? The defense, which was supposedly designed, I think probably a back 5, which was designed to help to hold the wall, so-called wall, against the JDT, the Southern Tigers juggernaut, it broke down that quickly by the pace, by the instant switch of gear from the wingers, from which how they transition inside the final third, from that pass, from the cross breaking through the offside trap, for Jairo to have the easiest of finishes at the far post from close range. It showed how fragile Selangor were at the back, and that is despite having their Jordanian international defender Muhammad Abu Naudi among the key players, and that included new signing their left wing back, Kevin Dioram, who transferred from the Thai League 1 club to play in the Malaysian League, and also making one of the number of Selangor players making their debut for the Red Giants in Malaysian club football. And as for Selangor, they do have quite a number who are making their debuts. Kevin Dioram notwithstanding, they had Richard Ankara, then they had William Lira, who returns to Malaysia, Zach Clough, a recent signing, and Chirigo Morales. Yep, like JDT, Selangor had 5 debutants in their starting 11, but whatever formation that Kinoshi had planned, it was just undone. And for much of the game in that first half, Selangor was spending more time trying to hold the line, with a lot of assistance from Kamalullah to keep the score as low as possible. And that was even in spite of Johor making an early substitution when their captain of the day, Samu Castillejo, had a hamstring pull and had to be substituted by Bergson, who curiously was substituted late in the second half by Nasho Insa. Rather curious, but a little bit more on that later. But still, it took Selangor. Selangor was so much at the backs of the wall. It's like they were spending much of the first half clearing, hacking the ball, punting the ball forward in hope. But even when they regained possession after making interceptions inside their own area, within 1 or 2 passes, the ball went straight back to the blue and red jerseys, the blue and red striped shirts. Yeah. They weren't able to hold on to possession. They were rather incohesive in moving the ball forward, which allowed Johor, despite not being at their highest level best, which is understandable because this is really the first game of their first competitive game of the season, and you can say is to an extent an extended pre-season ahead of their AFC Champions League elites league matches that are expected to begin next month. So there was a bit of incohesiveness from the Johor side, but Johor managed the game a lot better still, even with 5 debutants compared to Selangor. Selangor, for some reason, really looked like a group of headless chickens who only knew how to stick their bodies in front of goal, but did little else. And it took them the last 5 minutes of the first half to finally get something concrete going. Apart from having that earlier foray into the Johor third in the 20th minute mark or so, where they were unable to threaten or penetrate into the Johor box. But it took them that long, and it came from their new signing Trigaro Morales, their number 91, to finally get something going. It was like that diagonal ball, that in that quick transition from defense to attack. I think it started by Faisal Halim, then that diagonal ball from the middle swept down to the right in the 41st minute to Chiragor, who burst through the Johor back offside trap. And that was perhaps the only time Shihan Azmi, the JDT starting goalkeeper, had to do something serious to keep a clean sheet for the 90 minutes. He had to come out and prevent Chiragor from scoring, denying him the shot. Otherwise, it could have been a goal. It could have been 1-1 at the break. And then you have got another moment where a rare lapse in possession inside their own half by Johor, where fortunately Faisal Halim was already flagged for offside by the time Park Jun Hyung the right centre back in the Johor's 3-man back line, had to intercept and clear it away for safety. But the thing is, he had to intercept even whether Faisal was offside or not, because even in Faisal's current physical condition, or you can say game management, Faisal is still quite a threat when going forward down the left. His ability to take on defenders is still there, but perhaps maybe the stamina, partially because of the acid attack, he's not able to fully function 100% as he was pre-attack. Not 100%, but at least 90%. So Faisal was still quite dangerous, and the South Korean defender had to be at his alert best to clear the danger before the ball reached him. Once again, another cross from Chiragor, and that was as good as Selangor got going forward. On the other end, Johor, they were neat, but they weren't putting in their high tempo game. Understandable, first game of the season, we are not expecting too much magic out of it. And given that the pre-match build-up had gone on without incident compared to last year, when there was a lot of hoo-ha over the accusations which were unfounded over the SC attack on Faisal Halim, which subsequently led to Selangor refusing to go for a game that led to a walkover. This time, there was no such build-up, and as I've mentioned at the start of this video, my spotlight is on what Kinoshi could do against Johor. From the face of what we saw in the first half, Selangor were second best in all areas. They were really second best. They held up well thanks to Kalamula. If not for the Selangor custodian, you can imagine Selangor going 3 goals down at the break, and not the final score as it turned out. And that is despite Johor missing a few chances, not very clear-cut chances, but they hadn't turned on their gear yet to another level, which again Kinoshi would have some questioning to do, because Chiragor was a bit of a threat down the right late in the first half, but only Kinoshi could explain why this new signing, their number 91, was taken out at halftime for their tried and tested Alvin Fortes. Fair play to him for that, but William Lira was not making much of an impact going forward for Selangor. Chiragor was doing quite a bit of a running, making the better meaningful runs, even though few were successful, but the 2 runs that he did that caused problems for JDT, and it was rather strange that Kinoshi opted to take Chiragor out at the break, and keeping William Lira, who was rather anonymous throughout the game for Selangor up front. And that is, I think, if they are looking for a two-pronged solution to try to put extra pressure on JDT defense, because let's be honest about it, Selangor did not make any pressing at the Johor defense for much of the first half. You see very few Selangor players trying to close in on the JDT defense for patches, small patches, in the first 45 minutes. And that was as good as Selangor got, which I suspect runs contrary to what Kinoshi might have wanted. And I think it's quite clear there was some confusion in the way how his message is interpreted across different Selangor players in their yellow shirts. Because Zach Clough was trying his best, but you could see that from a few others, they weren't sure where they were going. They were not sure where they wanted to go, where they were supposed to be positioning if they are supposed to be playing a high pressing game. But if they're supposed to be playing a high pressing game, why was there so little high pressing in the first half? And only later on did they choose to do the pressing against Johor, who were not really at their best, but could provide an opportunity for a few moments of pressure had they tried to do so. This again, only Kinoshi can answer. Why did he decide to park the bus in the first half and only start to push a bit more forward when they conceded the second goal in the 64th minute? And even before Selangor conceded the second goal, once again, their best player of the evening, Kalamula, had to come out to deny João Figueiredo after a defender blocked the initial shot by Bergson. Again, the Selangor defense was really living by the thread. Already down by 1 goal, they were just barely hanging on. And you could say that they were not able to create much of an impact. Then, in the 62nd minute, Kalamula again had to save the blushes of the incompetent Selangor backline, who were once again overrun rather easily as the Southern Tigers the home team gradually upped their tempo, and Bergson once again was at the heart of this attack, with the shot after breaking through by staying onside alongside the rather flat-footed Selangor backline, only for Kalamula to make another big save. Imagine how many big saves Kalamula had to make. One in the 40th minute to deny Arif Aiman a free kick that could have gone in. Second one to deny Figueiredo from close range. Third, from Bergson inside the box again. And then there was nothing else he could do thereafter. The set piece marking also was left much to be desired. It was a rather straightforward set play goal. Arif Aiman with the corner, everybody jostling for the ball. Eddie Isarvilov, who was a mainstay in Johor's ACLE campaign last season and also for the second part of their domestic campaign, he ran behind Jairo, who was being marked by a Selangor defender, man mark, to head home at the far post. Very easy. Who was the other guy who was supposed to track Isarvilov, who is the center of the three-man defense for the home team? What were the Selangor players doing? Were they playing zonal marking? Doesn't look like it. They were having, you can say, man-to-man marking inside the box. But the man marking for the goal for Isarvilov was non-existent. The guy who was supposed to mark Isarvilov was not there. And that was it. That totally shattered Selangor. You could tell that Selangor were totally shattered by then. There was so much holding out they could do. Kalamuna had given them as much as possible to stay in contention. But once that goal came in by Isarvilov, it was game over. And unsurprisingly, with 20 minutes to play, Arif Aiman produced his trademark angle shot, his specialty, inside the box, that sealed the deal. Once again, the defender's inability to close him down at that critical point, there was nothing Kalamula could do. Even though you can't expect him to stick onto the post just to avoid an Arif Aiman goal. For a goalkeeper's perspective, it's a bit too risky. There was a bit of a gap so that he could at least try to move with the ball if Arif Aiman had chosen to cross instead, to react quickly for any goalkeeper in that position. So ultimately, that was it. And Kinoshi and that was only in that period after they conceded the goal did they try to press up. given that Johor were not always at their coherent best, they were not always at their most convincing. It's not like they were in super tip-top shape to get ready to make a statement with a 7-goal, 8-goal victory. No. And it's not like they fully understood what their new coach Cisco Munoz is trying to put to the players, but they knew more than enough to get the job done, to get the 3 points in the bag, and to lift the trophy, their first domestic trophy of the season. And by then, Selangor had given up. Back to Selangor. After the third goal, you could tell that even Kinoshi had given up with the substitutions he made. When Faisal Halim was already taken out before the hour, it was almost as good as the game is half gone. Then by the rest of the substitution, when they even took out a few more key players, including Kevin Dioram and Zach Clough, it was already like, it's game over. And that was it from Selangor. To lose to Johor is not surprising, but from the way Selangor take away the goalkeeper, Kalamula, the rest were subpar. That is in spite of Johor not being at their most lethal best. And given that their next game in a few days up is against Duli Pengiran Muda Mahkota FC of Brunei, or DPMM, who tomorrow are playing their first league game, Malaysia Super League game, since 2008. If Selangor really failed to defeat DPMM FC, then this will be a crisis that could plunge Kinoshi into perhaps losing his job at the end of this month. To lose to Johor is one thing, but to play in such a way that didn't make much of a dent in the Johor goal, despite Johor not being totally at their best, is, I think, given the squad that Selangor had, given the players that they had, given a few bright sparks in the way Selangor had in their transitions, but the pressing was not done enough. They allowed too much of the ball to Johor. And I think because of the inferiority complex against Johor, Kinoshi was helpless, as Selangor simply allowed, to an extent, allowed Johor to run over them. The game is over for Selangor against JDT. A defeat in the way it was expected, but not the manner in which they surrendered against a JDT not at their best, still are trying to find the right gears in the way they want their best 11 to be ahead of the AFC Champions League Elite campaign. But for Selangor, if they fail to beat DPMM at home for their first home game of the season, that's when the real trouble will begin in earnest. Fail to beat a DPMM that has retained only 2 foreigners from the Singapore League campaign last season, and having signed, among others, ex-JDT winger Shafiq Ahmad. Failure to beat them as the Brunei side tried to find their footing again in Malaysian League football would signal a crisis. As for Johor, I think a 3-0 win is not their best performance yet, but I think it's already a good start for them in what we expect them to win their 12th successive Malaysian Super League title in a row. I know it's that early, but their squad in depth, the squad they have is quite impressively frightening, and they will have more than enough at their disposal to clinch at least a few more domestic titles, the Super League, the Malaysia Cup, and the FA Cup again. But whether Johor can fix those glitches, especially in their midfield combination, because for Samu only to last 25 minutes was a bit disappointing. He was able to pull the strings from his position in the middle of the park, but Samu pulling out at 25th minute because of an injury was disappointing. And the thing is, yes, as much as Johor Darul Takzim predominantly and traditionally is always been based on the Spanish and Latin flair for football, but the mentality is more a bit on the British side, where I think even the Johor fans will expect every player to give their best and to give their all. It's not just to entertain for a moment and carry the big name, but to show that they really want to play for this shirt, to play for Johor Darul Taksim, to play for the region of Johor, Tunku Ismail Ibrahim, to play for the state of Johor and their fans and their supporters in Southeast Asia. So it's not the most convincing performance. Their passes at times were a bit sloppy, especially in the first half. There were some sparks. Hector Havel did well to cover a lot of ground in his Johor debut. Same with John Irazabal, who formed a rather impregnable trio alongside Park Jun Hyong and Isafrilov. And although Jonathan Silva was rather a bit anonymous, but Jairo, apart from the opening goal, did okay, was quite a bit of a threat on the left, but wasn't causing more than what he should. He could do better. A goal was a good statement, but he can be better. And for Johor, it's more about trying to push themselves a bit more, because this is a phase where Johor can still build on games before their first overseas game match, where they take on the Lion City Sailors of Singapore in their opening ASEAN Club Championship Shopee Cup Group B campaign on the 21st of this month at the same stadium where they won their Piala Subansing. I think within that 1 or 2 games, Johor will be able to fix a few things and perhaps be more than ready for the ASEAN Club Championship, Shopee Cup, and also the AFC Champions League Elite. Still, tahniah Johor Darul Taksim for clinching their 8th successive Piala Subansing and their 10th overall. I think there are more good things to come. Scrutiny on Cisco Munoz's tactics is still rather premature. One game doesn't make a summer, so I do look forward to see how Cisco is going to manage and get his men to perform better, especially in Asia, than what his predecessor Hector Bidoglio did last season in the 24-25 campaign.